expand our imagination.
Justification for being what you are.
And welcome to Washington Unplugged. I'm Bill Plante. As we continue our week-long coverage of the tragedy in Tucson today, I'm joined by CBS News Chief Political Consultant Marc Ambinder. And today, in addition, we'll talk to the Tucson Pima County Republican Chairman Brian Miller. He would like President Obama to call for a halt to the blame game, specifically blaming Republicans. He says they're being unfairly held responsible for the shooting spree on Saturday. We'll also talk to Paul Hilke, the president of the Brady Center to Prevent Gun Violence, who says that this time maybe Congress will agree to some kind of firearm restriction because the victim was one of their own. But first, Sarah Palin has released an 8-minute video statement today in which she blames the media for fanning the flames of hate. So, Marc, let's start with you and talk about that and take a look.
Well, it's a remarkable video for several reasons. For several days, Sarah Palin has said nothing. She has been accused, mainly by people on the left, of perhaps creating some of the climate that might have led the alleged assailant to do what he did.
Yeah,
but
specifically
for the most part,
the crosshair advertisement.
For the most, the crosshair advertisement, which is a trope of sorts that people on both sides have used for a long time. But it's fair to say that she's been under some degree of criticism. But if you look at the video and you look at the scope of what she says, it's almost presidential-esque. Let's take a look a little bit and go from there.
But especially within hours of a tragedy unfolding, journalists and pundits should not manufacture a blood libel that serves only to incite the very hatred and violence that they purport to condemn. That is reprehensible.
Well, Marc, let's talk about that in a minute. But first, I'd like to go to Pima County Chairman Brian Miller, who's standing by in Tucson and joins us now. Brian, welcome.
Thank you, Bill.
Brian, what do you hope that the Republicans will react to? I mean, you're concerned, I guess, about blame, right?
Well, I think now is not the time for blame or political finger pointing. Now's the time for healing, and that is what we're focused on here in Tucson, in Pima County, and throughout the state. And I hope that nationally people can respect that.
What do you think, or what do you hope, I guess, the president will say when he's there tonight?
I'm hopeful that the president will lead by example. I'm confident that he will, and that he'll ask for people to stop the finger pointing. You know, there's ongoing investigation. The fact is that we don't know motive. Anything that people ascribe motive to is pure conjecture. And I think it's unfortunate that certain people have done that a lot of people have done that, especially leaders in the political realm and on the national level. But we need to focus on the fact that we have our neighbors and our families, and this community is grieving. We need to let us go through this grieving process. This is a very human face to this. When you take away the political professions of two of the victims, at the bottom line, this is a massacre in our backyard, right down the street from my house. And we need to remember that, and I believe and I'm confident that the president will take the lead and lead by example tonight.
Mr. Miller, have you begun to set an example? Have you reached out, for example, and spoken with your Democratic counterpart in Pima County? And if so, what have you spoken about?
Yes, and Jeff Rogers, the chair of the Pima County Democrats, and I, we have agreed to stand arm in arm, shoulder to shoulder, with things that we agree with, and one of those things is exactly what I just said. And also, and I'm relieved to hear, as of recently, that the group, the out-of-state group that was going to protest the funerals, to my knowledge, they're not coming now. But Jeff and I were ready to stand side by side to attempt to give our friends and family and neighbors the dignity and peace that they need as they go through this terrible process. And I'm glad that we won't have to do that, but he and I agree that we need, as a community, to come together and not hurt these bonds that unite us. We need to heal them.
When you talk generally about politicizing this affair, do you mean, for example, that debates about high-capacity magazines or mental health laws or sharing information with the police ought to be off the table or postponed? Or are those valid debates to have?
Obviously, anything in dealing with the investigation is valid. But as far as public statements from public officials, I and the Pima County, under my leadership, the Pima County Republican Party have led by example. I will not discuss politics, political issues at this point. There will be a time for that. Absolutely, there will be a time for that. And I look forward to that because it'll be an indicator that we have progressed beyond this stage of grief and mourning. But right now, it's too close. It's in our backyard. These are people we knew. You know, we run as the Pima County Republicans. We know these people in the Pima County Democrats, and there's no personal animosity there. And we see that a lot of these folks were victimized, and our neighbors and friends. And you know, this is a very personal thing.
Although a lot of people have noted, Brian, that last fall's campaign was particularly nasty, the Giffords campaign, and I suppose that's part of the reason for the problem.
Politics have been nasty for thousands of years, Bill. And, you know, we'll discuss politics in a while, but not now.
Okay, very good, and we appreciate you coming, Brian. Thank you so much. Brian Miller, the Pima County Republican Chair. Mark, let's go back to the Palin video. How do you think this affects her stature? I mean, she looks almost presidential.
Right. I think it makes her the most prominent Republican, in a sense, to respond or to pre-spawn to what President Obama is going to say tonight. And of course, the president has an enormously difficult task because so many people are appropriating different things out of this incident. And the president is primarily there to share the grief of everyone and might not live up to people's expectations if they have significant expectations. But Sarah Palin, in a sense, has thrown a gauntlet, in a sense politicizing what she accuses other people of politicizing. She uses the phrase blood libel. Which is very interesting because, you know, originally the phrase obviously meant the libel on the Jewish people that they used the blood of Christians. Right. But it's come to mean something broader, hasn't it? Right, and in her sense, it simply means blaming, you know, her campaign rhetoric for the actions of a deranged lone individual. And she has she's very skillful at using events like this and criticism directed at her as a way of not only playing the victim, but in a sense, rousing people to her own cause. You see this over and over again, regardless of what happens with Sarah Palin. So in some sense, what you hear on the video isn't new, but what is new is the setting and the scope of what she says. And there's a strain of optimism throughout it, as you would hear in a presidential address. So be very interested to see the reactions from other Republicans in particular, whether she is able to become, in a sense, the spokesperson for Republicans at an event like this. Talk about pre-buttles. Unplugged spoke with Democratic Congressman Bob Filner of California yesterday. He has condemned the Tea Party and linked Saturday's shooting to the conservative movement. Our Nancy Cordes noted to him that several Tea Party leaders have come out and said there's no indication that Jared Loughner is affiliated with the Tea Party and that to make these accusations is irresponsible. Take a listen.
Well, you know, that in itself is a political statement because they are not taking responsibility for any of the violent rhetoric that they had during the campaign. I mean, Miss Palin would say, you know, we can't retreat, we have to reload. You know about the 20 targeted figures with crosshairs. By saying it was a crazy individual, that relieves them of the responsibility. Sure, he was crazy, but crazy people are especially vulnerable to the kind of hate rhetoric, the delegitimizing of our government officials, the rhetoric that said we have to reload and let's eliminate these people.
Congressman Bob Filner demonstrating that this argument has a way of becoming circular.
Well, look, a lot of Democrats were the subject and you could say target of a lot of that rhetoric, so they take it very, very personally, and I think that's what you're seeing with Congressman Filner. But in a sense, the Tea Party has a point. They're really, for the most part, with some exceptions, and there are some notable exceptions, the rhetoric they used was heated, but it wasn't out of line with the broad history of American political rhetoric. That doesn't mean, of course, that you can't make an argument that Americans and politicians should think before they speak and should do their best to distinguish themselves in what they say from the rantings of lunatics. But that doesn't at all say that perhaps the Tea Party was responsible or bears some burden of responsibility for this. But I can see why members of Congress, particularly Democrats, are very sensitive to this, because they ran in this environment. Every week they'd be at a campaign event. They'd be accused of being socialist. They'd be accused of being illegitimate. It's very personal to them.
And there's now discussion in Congress, of course, about protection for members. There's even one bill to put an enclosure around the gallery.
Right. I'm not sure what that says about people's faith in the Capitol Police. One would assume that they would be able to screen out explosives. Today, of course, the U.S. Capitol Police and I've just learned the U.S. Secret Service is also briefing both members of both houses separately, both Republicans and Democrats separately, on security measures, what practically can be done, how to report a threat, what types of communications tend to be more inappropriate, and a basic thing like how do you advance, is the word in politics we call it, but how do you set up an event in a way that makes it marginally more safe for everyone there? You ask a local police officer perhaps to sit there in a squad car. There are some practical things that members of Congress can do that won't cost a lot, but also won't limit their access to people, which is, of course, the sine qua non of their job.
Mark, let's welcome Paul Hilke, the head of the Brady Center to Prevent Gun Violence. Paul, welcome.
Thank you.
In the wake of this, here's the big question. Does this reignite any kind of fervor in Congress for some kind of firearm restriction legislation?
I certainly hope so. I mean, we talk about the history of violence and the history of rhetoric, and the one thing that's different today than was different in the past is the lethality of the weapons that are easily available to the general public. I even go back to the Bobby Kennedy assassination, the George Wallace shooting in the late 60s, early 70s. When Bobby Kennedy was shot, only one person was hit with a bullet in that back corridor in the Ambassador Hotel. When Wallace was paralyzed, only one person was hit at that shopping center. Now, when you go for an assassination attempt, you've got a gun that can get off 30 rounds within 15 seconds. And those are the sorts of issues that I think we need to talk about. Yes, we've got to look at the motive, but when Ronald Reagan and Jim Brady, who were named after, were shot almost 30 years ago, the motive had nothing to do with politics. It was impressing a movie star. So this is personal this time, I think, to Congress. This is one of their own. The other victims are pull at the heartstrings. The fact that it's personal, one of their own, I think, is going to make a difference this time. And the fact that it was a legal purchase. The fact that it was a legal purchase, I think, makes the case how weak our laws are. You can't respond by saying, we just need to enforce the laws in the books. There weren't enough laws in the books to stop this guy.
Okay, Paul, but in the last 15 years, the percentage of Americans favoring stricter gun control laws has dropped in the Gallup survey by 34 percentage points.
And those numbers just went up 7 points from December, too, on the new poll that you released today. So a lot of that assumes that people know what the laws are. They're asked, should they be more strict, less strict? When you ask people specific questions, if you ask, should we have background checks on all sales of guns at gun shows? Should there be restrictions on assault weapons? Should we limit the number of guns to buy each month? Then you get 75 to 85% supporting those things, and you even get large percents of gun owners and NRA members supporting those.
You know, I've noticed that even, as you say, polls of gun owners show that most gun owners are willing to accept reasonable restrictions, for example, instant mandatory and valid instant background checks. Many gun owners probably aren't familiar with the type of high capacity magazine that was used in this shooting.
I hope not, because they're only good basically for killing a lot of people quickly.
Well, it is. It's hard to think of another purpose. But my question is that even if public opinion remains on the side of some form of gun control, why has the NRA been so powerful, in a sense, and so effective in scaring Democrats from even speaking up about things like this?
I think they're a paper tiger. But what they've successfully done is they've convinced Republicans that the Second Amendment means no restrictions at all, even though that's not what Justice Scalia and the conservatives on the Supreme Court say. They say reasonable restrictions are allowed. So that's the problem on the Republican side. On the Democratic side, they've convinced the Democrats that somehow this is the reason Democrats lost in '94, Gore lost in 2000. One of the things I point out is Bill Clinton, who was the one who pushed the Brady bill, pushed the assault weapon ban, the restriction on high-capacity clips, was reelected in 1996, and he didn't run away from the issue. He had Jim and Sarah Brady at the convention that year. I think they've just fallen into this myth that the NRA is powerful. The NRA spent $15 million in states like Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana in 2008 against Obama, and he carried all those states. The people that the NRA endorsed on the Democratic side this election, most of them lost.
Yeah, but to call them
the people that signed under the gun show loophole bill, Democrats, almost 99% of them won.
Yeah, but to call them a paper tiger begs the question of what influence they have over individual members in individual districts.
Yeah, they still have a lot of clout. I mean, I'm a former elected official. I was the Republican nominee for U.S. Senate in Indiana in 1998. And I had people challenge me, especially in the Republican primary, on my stances on gun control because I was an urban mayor. And I carried it when I said, look, I'm doing this because my police chief and my police officers tell me that the bad guys are getting these weapons too easily. It's a law and order issue. Republicans used to talk law and order. They've left that, and the Democrats don't know how to respond.
What would you like to hear then from President Obama tonight? Is tonight the appropriate venue or forum to talk about some of these issues?
I'm not sure how he's going to craft his speech tonight. That's a challenge for any leader. But the president needs to step up and show some leadership on this issue. If not tonight, very soon. Because, again, you can have all the heated political rhetoric in the world. You can have all these issues. If it weren't for that easy access to those guns. This guy was too dangerous for his algebra class. He was too unstable for the military. But he was able to go into a store and even showing apparently aberrant behavior at the store, able to buy the sort of gun that the military, the sort of ammunition that the military used. That doesn't make sense. People need to realize how weak the gun laws are. The president needs to give us some leadership, and the people need to speak up and push their elected representatives. And I think really if they get some push from the bottom, then we'll get something done. Just one last thing on that point. After the Virginia Tech shootings, not a whole lot was done, but we did get a bill passed that Carolyn McCarthy pushed to give incentives and disincentives to the states to report more records of those who are mentally ill, particularly mentally dangerous. One of the reasons that got through is the NRA backed down. They didn't oppose it, and I think one of the reasons is they realized they didn't have an answer. I think it's the same thing on these high-capacity clips. Well, I'm not sure how anybody can respond to you need more than 10 bullets.
And she has a bill now which would prohibit those high-capacity clips once again.
And the significance, again, is that's another thing that I think makes this one difference. You can point to a specific law that would have made a difference here. We had a law in effect for 10 years till the assault weapon ban expired in 2004 that said you couldn't have clips with more than 10 rounds, and the significance relates directly to what happened that day because he was stopped when he went to change his clip. If he had emptied his clip after 10 rounds instead of after 30 rounds, that's 20 less bullets flying, and since 19 people were hit, that's a lot less people injured.
All right. Paul Hilke, president of the Brady Center to Prevent Gun Violence, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And as always, Marc Ambinder, thank you for co-hosting. And thank you for watching Washington Unplugged. Join us again tomorrow at 12:30 and stay with CBSNews.com throughout the day for continuing coverage of the tragedy in Tucson. I'm Bill Plante. Have a good day.